Welcome to Velvet Confessions, the channel where real stories find their voice. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. And before we begin, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We have viewers tuning in from Vancouver, Toronto, Calgary, right across this country, and it always means the world to see your city pop up on the hunts. Now, settle in, because this one is going to stay with you.
She zipped up her suitcase on a Tuesday morning like she was packing for a weekend trip. She didn't slam doors. She didn't leave a note full of accusations. She just left.
And Julian Mercer stood in the hallway of the house he had spent 14 months renovating for her, the one with the wraparound porch she had pointed at in a magazine and said someday, and watched the cab pull out of the driveway. He told himself she would come back. She didn't. 4 years later, Julian walked into a coffee shop on the edge of Kensington Market in Toronto, and the woman sitting near the window wasn't looking at him. She was laughing at something on her phone, her dark hair pulled back the way she always wore it on lazy mornings, and there were 2 small children across from her in the booth, a boy and a girl, and they had his mother's cheekbones and his own stubborn jaw, and Julian Mercer stopped walking entirely. The barista said something. He didn't hear it. He just stood there, in the middle of that coffee shop, while the world rearranged itself around him. Julian had grown up in Oakville, the kind of town where people stayed. His father had run a small architecture firm for 30 years. His mother, piano to neighborhood kids in their living room every Saturday. There was nothing flashy about the Mercers. What they had, they built slowly. Julian had taken that same philosophy into his work. He started Mercer Design Group out of a rented desk in a shared office space when he was 26. By the time he was 32, they had offices in Toronto and Montreal, a reputation for thoughtful commercial architecture, and more contracts than they could comfortably take on. He wasn't a billionaire, but he was the kind of man who could buy the house with the wraparound porch and spend 14 months making it right. Because he believed in doing things properly. He had met Serena Whitfield at an industry gala. She was a structural engineer, smart, precise, funny, in a dry way that snuck up on you. They argued about building materials on their first date, and she was right, and he respected her for it. So much, he asked her to dinner again the next week. They were married in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside Niagara on the lake. His parents were there. Her mother was there. Her older brother Damien gave a toast that went on slightly too long and made a joke at Julian's expense that nobody laughed at except Damien. That should have told him something. The first 2 years were good, genuinely good, not just quietly functional good. They cooked together on Sundays. They disagreed about furniture. They drove up to Muskoka in August and argued companionably about whether the dock needed replacing. And Julian replaced it anyway, and Serena admitted it looked better, and they sat out there after dark with wine and the particular silence of people who are comfortable with each other. Then the calls started. Not from Serena, from Damien. Damien Whitfield was 4 years older than his sister and had never quite found his footing in the same way she had. He worked in sales, then finance, then sales again. He borrowed money with an easy confidence, as though the repayment were a detail that would work itself out. Julian had lent him money twice in the first year of the marriage, once for what Damien described as a short-term cash flow issue, once for a business opportunity that never materialized into anything Julian could see. The third time Julian said no. It was a reasonable no. They had just taken on a major contract that required capital up front. Julian explained this calmly, the way he explained everything. He offered to look over Damien's finances, connect him with someone who could help him consolidate the debt more strategically. Damien did not want strategic help. He wanted the money. And somewhere in the 2 weeks that followed, something shifted in Julian's house. He couldn't name it at the time. Serena was quieter. She left rooms when he entered them, not rudely, just efficiently. There were fewer Sundays in the kitchen. The Muskoka trip that summer got postponed, then quietly canceled. When Julian asked what was wrong, she said nothing was wrong and said it in a tone that made the conversation feel closed. He asked again, a few weeks later. He asked carefully, he thought. He said he could feel that something had changed between them and he wanted to understand it. She said she needed some space to think. He gave her the space. He had always believed that people deserved room to sort through things. He had been raised in a house where emotions were acknowledged but not weaponized. His parents worked things out. They went for walks. They came back. He assumed Serena needed the same thing. Time, patience, the understanding that he wasn't going anywhere. He didn't know that while he was being patient, he wouldn't know that for 4 years. She was gone by October. She told him she wasn't happy. She told him the marriage had stopped feeling like a partnership. She used the phrase growing in different directions, which Julian had always found vague in other people's divorces, and found devastating in his own. He didn't fight it. He asked if she wanted to try counseling. She said no. He asked if there was something specific he had done. She said it wasn't about one thing. He signed the papers in January in a lawyer's office downtown, and he drove home along the lakeshore and sat in the parking lot of a grocery store for 40 minutes before he went and bought food he didn't end up eating. He thought about it constantly in the first year, what he had missed, what he had done wrong. He hired a therapist, not because he was in crisis, but because he believed in maintenance, the way he believed in it for buildings. Catch the problems before the structure fails. The therapist helped him understand that he had perhaps been so accustomed to giving people room that he had confused patience with absence. He worked. He rebuilt. He ran along the waterfront most mornings, and he called his parents on Sundays, and slowly, the shape of Wise's life, without Serena, became something he could move through without it feeling like moving through water. He was not over her. He had loved her. You don't undo that cleanly. But he had stopped expecting her to come back. And then he walked into a coffee shop on a Thursday afternoon in September, and she was sitting by the window with 2 children who had his mother's cheekbones, and he stopped walking entirely. The boy noticed him first. He was perhaps turning 4, with that particular self-possession of small children who have been talked to like people. He looked up from whatever he was doing with a straw wrapper and assessed Julian with the frank curiosity of someone who had not yet learned to pretend he wasn't looking. The girl was slightly smaller, or maybe just sitting lower in the booth. Same dark hair as her mother. She was eating a piece of banana bread with focused concentration. Serena looked up. The color left her face. Not all at once. In stages, the way light changes before a storm, she went very still. Julian crossed the coffee shop. He was aware of his own heartbeat in a way that felt clinical, removed, as though he were observing it. He stopped at the edge of the booth. "Serena," he said. "Julian." Her voice was even. She had always been good at that. He looked at the children. He looked back at her. He said, very quietly, "How old are they?" She didn't answer right away. The boy was still watching Julian with that same unimpressed curiosity. The girl had paused her banana bread. 3, Serena said. "They just turned 3 in July." Julian did the math that he suspected. He had already done the moment he saw them, the math that had been sitting in his chest like a stone since he walked through the door. He and Serena had separated in October. She had left in October, July, 3 years old. He looked at her. "Serena!" "I know," she said. The boy leaned forward, interested. "Who are you?" he asked, in the direct way of a child who has been taught that questions are appropriate. Julian looked at him. Something in him, some carefully maintained structural wall, developed a crack. "I'm not sure yet," he said honestly. "What's your name?" "Archer," the boy said. "And I'm Wren," the girl added, without looking up from her banana bread. Julian pulled out the chair across from the booth slowly, because his legs were not entirely reliable. He sat down. "We need to talk," he said. "Yes," said Serena. "We do." They didn't talk there, not with the children present. Serena texted someone, her mother, Julian assumed, and 20 minutes later an older woman arrived and swept practiced efficiency and a bag full of distractions. Wren went without complaint. Archer looked back at Julian twice. Julian ordered a coffee he didn't drink. Serena told him the whole thing. She had been pregnant when she left. 6 weeks, barely. She hadn't known until 2 weeks after she filed the paperwork. She'd had every intention of telling him. She had picked up the phone 4 times in the first month. But Damien had been in her ear by then for months. Stories about Julian that weren't quite lies, just interpretations. That Julian was controlling. That his patience was really just stonewalling. That his refusal to lend Damien money was a power play. A way of showing the Whitfields that they would always be less than him. She had been so thoroughly convinced that Julian was a different person than the one she married, that by the time she found out about the pregnancy, she genuinely believed he would use it as leverage. That he would lawyer up, that he would turn it into a battle. So she hadn't told him. She moved to Toronto. They had been living in Oakville. And she built a life. She got a job at a firm downtown. Her mother helped with the twins. It was hard. It was genuinely hard. 2 jobs in the first year, the particular exhaustion of solo parenting infants, the specific loneliness of not having the person you'd planned to do this with. But she had done it. Jules listened to all of this. Without interrupting, when she finished, he sat with it for a moment. Then he said, "Damien borrowed money from me twice. The third time I said no, because we had a capital commitment that month. That was the whole story." Serena closed her eyes. "I know," she said. "I know that now. I figured it out about 8 months after Archer and Wren were born. I found messages on his phone. He'd left it at my mother's, and I saw what he'd actually been telling me. What he'd been adding to, taking out of context." She opened her eyes. "I've been trying to figure out how to find you ever since. I still live in Oakville," Julian said. "I know. I drove past the house once." She looked at her hands. "I didn't know how to start the conversation." "With the truth," he said. "That's how you start it." He didn't say it harshly. That was the thing about Julian. He almost never did anything harshly. But there was a weight to the words that sat between them in the afternoon quiet of the coffee shop and didn't move. He didn't sleep well that night. He lay in the dark in the house in Oakville, the one with the wraparound porch, and he thought about 4 years. He thought about a Tuesday morning in a cab pulling out of the driveway. He thought about a boy named Archer who had his mother's eyes and had looked back at him twice. He thought about a girl named Wren who ate banana bread with focused concentration and had said her name without drama as a simple fact, because that's who she was. He had 2 children. They were 3 years old. They had been alive for 3 years, and he had spent those 3 years working and running along the waterfront and believing he was rebuilding a life, when actually there was a piece of it entirely missing. A piece he hadn't known to look for. He called his mother in the morning. She cried. He had expected that. What he hadn't expected was his father getting on the phone 10 minutes into the conversation and saying, very quietly, "Julian, you know what you need to do. You've always known what to do. Just do it." His father was a man of very few words, and Julian had learned to trust every one of them. He texted Serena the next day. He asked if he could see the children. She said yes. She said she had expected he would ask sooner. He said he hadn't wanted to push. She sent back a reply that took a long time to arrive, and when it came it said only, "That was always the thing about you. You never pushed." He wasn't sure if it was an apology or an observation. He filed it away. The first visit was a Saturday afternoon at a park near her apartment in the annex. Julian arrived 5 minutes early and sat on a bench and watched a pigeon investigate. A pretzel. Someone had dropped and told himself to breathe. Archer arrived with immediate business. He had brought a rock he had found on the walk over, and he needed Julian to confirm that it was a good rock. Julian examined it seriously and confirmed that it was an excellent rock with notable weight distribution and an interesting gray-green coloring that suggested mineral variation. Archer was satisfied. Wren observed this transaction from a safe distance of approximately 2 feet. Then she moved to stand directly in front of Julian, looked up at him with the unnerving directness she had apparently been born with, and said, "Are you going to come back?" Julian looked at her. "Yes," he said. "I am." She considered this. Then she sat down next to him on the bench with the particular confidence of a child who has made a decision. Archer came back with a second rock for evaluation. Julian evaluated it. The months that followed were not simple. He and Serena were careful with each other in the way of people who have been through something that didn't have a clean resolution. Not a fight, not a betrayal, exactly, something more complicated than that. A series of errors in judgment, a man who had given too much space, and a woman who had been fed too many doubts, and a brother who had been petty and small and done damage that he probably hadn't fully understood he was doing. Julian had a lawyer draw up a proper co-parenting agreement. He didn't do it to establish leverage. He did it because he believed in clear structures. Serena agreed to it without pushback, which told him something about where she was too. He drove into Toronto every Wednesday evening and every other weekend. He learned Archer's opinions about rocks, which were numerous and detailed. He learned that Wren had a small stuffed rabbit named Official. She had named it herself at 18 months, and they had not tried to talk her out of it. And that Official needed to be present for all significant events, including bedtime, Saturday mornings, and certain meals. He sat on the floor of Serena's apartment and built things with wooden blocks and answered questions with patience. He had apparently been storing up for 4 years. He took the children to Riverdale Farm once, and Archer was beside himself about the goats. Wren stood at a respectful distance from the goats and took the situation under advisement. He started to understand who they were. He started to understand in a slower way who Serena was now too, not who he had married, not who he had grieved, but who she had become in 4 hard years of doing something alone, that she had not planned to do alone. She was steadier in some ways, more direct. She asked for what she needed, without apologizing for it, which she had always struggled to do before. He admired it. He was honest with himself about that. Damien called Julian in November. Julian didn't know how Damien had found his number. He suspected Serena's mother, who had always been fonder of her son than her son deserved. Damien opened with a version of an apology that was mostly a series of explanations. He had been in a hard place. He had been stressed about the money. He hadn't thought Serena would take it as seriously as she did. He hadn't realized he hadn't meant. Julian listened. He was good at listening. Then he said, "Damien, I'm not interested in explaining to you why what you did was wrong. You know why. It was wrong. I don't have space in my life for this conversation." Damien said something about family. "You'll be at the edges of my children's lives," Julian said, "because they're Serena's family, and I respect that, but I won't pretend we're something we aren't." He ended the call. He sat with it for a moment, the residual weight of it, the old anger he had not known he was carrying, and then he put on his running shoes and went out along the lakeshore in the November cold and let the wind take most of it. He wasn't a man who held on to things past their usefulness. Anger had its place. It told you what had mattered. But it made a poor tenant. He asked Serena for coffee in December. Not the children this time, just the two of them. She looked at him for a moment when he asked, reading something in his face, and then she said, yes. They went to a place on College Street that she liked, different from the coffee shop in Kensington. Neutral ground. They sat across from each other and ordered, and were quiet for a moment, in the way of two people who had shared a life and then lived separate ones, and weren't sure yet what the shape of the current thing was. Julian said, "I don't want to make assumptions, so I'm going to ask directly. Do you want to try again?" She was quiet long enough that he braced himself. Then she said, "I think I've wanted to ask you the same thing since I saw your face in that coffee shop in September." "You could have just asked," he said. She laughed quietly. "You were the one who showed up with a property evaluation of Archer's rock collection. It's an impressive collection." "It is," she agreed. "He gets that from somewhere." Julian looked at her. "I want to be honest with you about what I can do and what I'm not sure about. I'm not in a place where I can pretend the last 4 years didn't happen. I can't do the grand gesture. I'm not built for it. I know what I can do is show up every time for the kids, and if you want that, for you. I don't know how fast that goes or what it looks like, but I can show up." Serena wrapped both hands around her mug. She looked at him with the same directness Wren had inherited, and he understood in that moment where his daughter had gotten it from. "That's what I always wanted," she said. "That's the whole thing. I just got talked into thinking it wasn't enough." They didn't solve everything in one coffee. That wasn't how either of them worked. But when they walked out onto College Street in the December cold, their breath making small clouds in the air, Julian held the door and Serena stepped through, and they stood on the sidewalk up for a moment, and They walked the same one. By spring, they had fallen into something that didn't have a name yet, but had a shape. Serena had the house in the annex. Julian still had the house in Oakville, the one with the wraparound porch. On the weekends he had the children. They often ended up at one or the other, and there was a slow accumulation of small things. Archer's rock collection, starting to occupy a shelf in Julian's kitchen. Official the rabbit, spending one unauthorized night at Julian's place after Wren fell asleep before they could drive home, and nobody wanted to wake her. His mother came to Toronto and met the children in March. She held Wren on her lap and read her a picture book, and Julian watched his mother's face and felt something in him settled, that he hadn't known was unsettled. "Your cheekbones," he said after. His mother looked him into a hug and pulled an April hug that went on long enough that he stopped counting. There was one evening in April that he thought out many times. They were at Serena's, all four of them, after dinner. Archer had constructed an elaborate situation with his rock collection on the kitchen floor, the logic of which he was explaining at length to anyone who would hold still long enough. Wren was on the couch with Official and a book she couldn't quite read yet, but was definitely reading, and Serena was washing up at the sink, and Julian was drying. And there was music on low from somewhere, one of those Sunday playlists that wander through soft things. He didn't say anything. He just dried a mug and listened to Archer's geological lecture, and the low music and the sound of water in the sink. Serena handed him a bowl and glanced at him sideways. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "I'm just here." She looked at him for a moment, then she went back to washing up. But she was smiling. They weren't in a hurry. That was the thing about the two of them. Neither of them had ever been in a hurry, not really. They believed in building things properly, and properly meant taking the time to get the foundation right before you started on the walls. They were careful. They were honest. They had difficult conversations in the kitchen after the children were asleep. The kind of conversations that didn't always end cleanly, but always ended with both of them still sitting at the table, because that was the agreement. You stayed at the table. Julian moved his running route. He ran along the waterfront here now, the city, and in the mornings he would sometimes see the same particular pigeon near the park, who had a bold attitude toward dropped food and no respect for personal space. And he had started to think of this pigeon as a kind of neighborhood fixture, the way you do when you've decided to stay somewhere. He was staying. He had, it turned out, been staying all along. He had just been waiting for the address to catch up with the decision. Archer found a rock in May, near the ravine, pale gray with an unusual crystalline surface, and brought it to Julian with the solemnity of a significant discovery. Julian examined it at length. He turned it in the light. He noted the crystalline structure, the weight, the irregular edge on one side that suggested a particular kind of natural fracture. "This," he said, "is a very serious rock." Archer nodded. He had known this. He had simply needed confirmation. "Can I keep it here?" he asked. Julian looked at him, at the earnest, self-possessed face that had looked back at him twice in a coffee shop doorway and seemed to have been deciding about him ever since. "You can keep it here," Julian said. "You can keep whatever you need here." Archer accepted this with the dignity of a man whose estate plans had been confirmed, and went back to the kitchen floor. Julian stood at the window and looked out at the porch. The wraparound porch. The one from the magazine, the one he had spent 14 months getting right. You can't build the right house if you're not sure yet who it's for. He understood now. He had always been building it for this.